Brooks, it was your idea to, when you were president of the Historical Society here in Pembroke, to write a history of the 20th century from 1900 to the year 2000. And why'd you pick me to write it?
Because I wanted it done correctly.
Well, what did it do? It took me about a year to do it, but I interviewed quite a few people in town. Tommy Redding and Everett Reed, and who was Mr. Pembroke at one time, and we got a lot of good anecdotes out of it.
I think so.
Yeah. This book sold like pancakes, and continues at the to be sold at various functions, such as the old-fashioned fish fry at the Herring Run. The whole purpose was to gain some revenue for the three buildings that the Historical Society owns. What are those buildings, Brooks?
What are the buildings?
Yeah.
Well, the Historical Society Museum in the center of town, which is a amalgamation of two different old school buildings. Okay, and the other buildings are the Ada Hall House, dates back to 1685.
Yeah, that's on Route 14 out here.
Right, yeah. And the Quaker Meeting House, which is allegedly the second oldest religious meeting house in the country.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The only one to exceed it is a synagogue down in Newport.
Oh yes,
Newport, Rhode Island.
Yeah. Yes, you spoke about the Quaker Meeting House, also called the Friends Meeting House, and it was originally thought that that building was built in Scituate and was moved up the North River on gondolas. But Libby Bates, during her research for the 275th anniversary of Pembroke, did extensive research with her compadres and found that actually it was the congregation that moved up from Scituate, but that the building was actually built right here in Pembroke, right on the corner where it is now.
I believe you're correct there, yeah.
They open it occasionally, all the time. I've done a little lecture up there at one time. I was invited to do so when I wrote a piece about Bob Melville and Craig Fleming, who were the owners and publishers of the famous Silver Lake News.
Right.
And did that go over well?
Did your talk go over well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I wanted to do that, and because I love those two guys. They were quite special. Former Boston Herald reporters who came down here and purchased the Silver Lake News back in the mid-1960s, I think.
Yeah, early 60s. Yeah.
I remember Brooks, Tommy Redding, a marvelous character in town who spoke rather loudly and never needed a microphone at town meeting. He was somewhat of a gadfly at town meeting. But in any case, there's a great anecdote about him. Bob Gillette, you remember Bob?
Oh, yes.
Bob became
state
representative eventually, but this may have happened before Bob became a state representative. But one Saturday morning, he showed up at Tommy's house and at his kitchen, and he said, "Tommy, I want to talk to you about something." And do you remember this anecdote?
Yes.
He said, "But before I do, I have to go to the bathroom. Do you mind if I use your bathroom?" And Tommy said, "Sure, go ahead." So Bob went into the bathroom, and Tommy followed immediately after. And when Bob shut the door, Tommy grabbed onto the doorknob so that he couldn't get out. And the reason he did so was that Tommy's lovely wife, Jeanette, was taking a bath in the bathtub, and she was stark naked. And of course, Bob kept banging on the door to get out. Is that how you remember the
That's
story? Yeah. And of course, Jeanette was screaming, "Holy bloody blue murder!" She says, "I'll get you, Tommy, for this." And that was one of the wonderful characters. Tom and Jeanette, Tommy was a tree warden, and he was also the herring superintendent in town. And he and his wife, Jeanette, lived on Center Street on Route 36, where when he retired, they opened up a...
Grandpa Tom's vegetable stand.
That's right, yes. They sold vegetables, corn. He grew a lot of these vegetables himself, he and his wife, Jeanette. And everybody knew him in town. He was quite a popular guy, full of fun and full of practical jokes. And that was one of them that I just happen to recall.
Tommy took me ice fishing once, and my two oldest boys. And so we went across the street to Oldham Pond.
Yeah.
There was enough ice that time so that he could drive his pickup truck right onto the ice and everything. And then he proceeds to prepare a meal. And he had a stove on the back of the pickup truck. I think Jeanette may have suggested that he move out for a while after some transgression. But my kids still talk about eating the fried onions with their fingers off of Tommy's outdoor cookery thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, his idea of ice fishing, I went with him a couple of times, and we went to Hobmont Pond off of Route 36 there, Center Street, and his idea was to drill these holes in the ice and put these flags that would flip up when we caught a fish, and just sit there in his pickup truck and freeze because it was cold. It was winter. And so one day I decided to go with him once again ice fishing, and I brought my ice skates, and while we were waiting for the flags to flip up, I skated around the pond. Well, he thought that was ridiculous. He just didn't think that it was proper to ice fish and ice skate at the same time. So anyway, that's another story about Tommy. Yeah, you mentioned, we were talking about recently Everett Reed. And Everett, as I recall, was one of the first to join the service after December 7th, 1941, the attack upon Pearl Harbor. And he had low blood pressure. So he went to Dr. Studley. He said, how can I got turned down in my first shot at joining the service because I had low blood pressure. So Dr. Studley said, here's what you do. Go to the post office building in Boston and run up and down a flight of stairs 2 or 3 times. And he did, and that will bring your blood pressure up. And so he did so, and when he finished running down the stairs, he found himself outside of the Navy recruiting office, and so he joined the Navy, and became, what did he become here in Pembroke, Brooks?
Well, he was postmaster in Bryantville for a long time, and the thing I enjoyed is that he employed his father as the chief janitor for the Bryantville thing.
Yeah.
And then he gave his father some kind of award for being like janitor of the year or janitor of the century or something.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, Everett became the sort of like a Mr. Pembroke, I think he was called that at one time. And Everett was the head of the American Legion in town, and he ran, directed the various parades, such as the Veterans Day Parade and the
Memorial Day was his big day.
Yeah, sure. And they set up a stand outside of First Church here, just opposite the town hall, and gave a speech every year and had other folks speaking on the platform there. And he was quite active in town, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Served on several. He served on several boards in town at one time or other.
I think so, and a few of the celebrations, and he was on the bicentennial committee.
Oh, that's right too. Yeah. Sure.
And we're very dedicated to.
Yeah, he was.
As much as anybody I could think of in town.
Sure. Yeah. His wife was Harriet.
Yes.
And I believe she lived when he first met her. At the time, she was living in Wisconsin, I think it was. And he went out to live there for a while, but he talked her into moving back to his hometown, Pembroke, where he was born and raised. You say a wonderful couple in town were Dr. Angley and his lovely wife, Florence. And I called him in the book ubiquitous because he was everywhere. He was the school physician, and he visited homes, unlike doctors today where you have to visit them. He would go to the homes around town. And he became an officer in the Army during World War II. And a very gentle fellow, and his wife Florence. Tell me about Florence. You know more about Florence than I do.
Well, not an awful lot, but I do. She's very active in the Republican politics.
Yeah.
And just a lady about town.
And wasn't she some sort of fifth generation or something from? A descendant from
Barker.
The Barker family.
The ones who founded the town of Pembroke.
Yeah. Robert Barker and a fellow named Dola Davis came up from the North River and with a third companion and canoed up the Herring Brook and stopped at where the Herring Run is today.
Yes.
And eventually, he eventually built that Garrison House, which is no longer with us, but that was on the corner there, wasn't it? 14 and High Street?
Yes, yeah, and initially he built a very modest cabin, I think, just to keep out the weather.
Yeah.
And later on the Garrison House, which existed almost until the 20th century, I think.
Yeah. And wasn't there was a barn connected to it that Bert Sherman, who a wonderful guy in town, Pembroke born, got that barn and brought it a little bit further along High Street, and didn't he modernize it and make it into a home?
He did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bert Sherman had wonderful, he was a jazz buff, and he had various musicians come to the back of his house and had parties and with jazz bands, and he sponsored jazz festivals at the Old Colony Sportsman's Club off of Forest Street, and he just loved jazz, and he couldn't get enough of it. And at his recent funeral service at First Church, his lovely wife, Patricia, had a jazz band playing at this memorial service, playing When the Saints Go Marching In and a number of other tunes. It was just a marvelous remembrance of Bert, who was beloved by all in town, just a sweetheart of a guy.
Yeah, when we started the Arts Festival, Bert was one of the original directors, and he was pretty much in charge of selecting the music. So we had Dixieland the first 2 or 3 years.
That's right. Was it Lou Colombo and Dick Johnson?
Colombo and Dick Johnson,
Dick Johnson, yeah. They were wonderful. Well, you were the founder and the guy who had the idea of the Pembroke Arts Festival, and we were so thrilled about it that the very first year we started calling it the first annual Arts Festival, and now it's in its 44th. It was 1968.
68, yeah. I'm not sure what I'd have to count on my fingers to figure what it.
Well, how'd you come up with this idea?
Well, I was having some success with the local art shows with my work being accepted and won a few prizes.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of always irked me that I had to go someplace else to accept the award. And we'd get a couple of friends and we'd go to Situate or Cohasset or wherever I'd won the award. And I said, geez, why don't we have one right here?
Yeah.
And I just have to go downtown and pick up my award.
Yeah.
So we started it. We started with 9 guys. Later on, there was some the women's libers got involved with it and thought that it was terrible. We didn't have any women on the board of directors.
Well, that's
but
good. That's
after a while, they get.
How did you pick these initial guys? I mean, my understanding is not a one of them, except for yourself, was an artist.
That's correct. Well, I just, started with a few friends, and each friend brought another one with them.
Yeah.
And so we had quite a mix of people. We had Republicans and Democrats. We had newcomers to town and old timers. And,
sure.
A good mix.
Yeah, and Bert Sherman was one of the
Bert was one
initial
of the, and
directors.
you were one of those.
Yes, I was. Yeah. And Bert was in charge of blowing up balloons. Wasn't
Yes,
he?
yeah.
And
in addition to jazz, he liked balloons.
yes, that's right. And he got us going with the jazz that Saturday evening. It was like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were very good. Lou Colombo and Dick Johnson.
Yeah.
And I remember you asked me to do the PR, get the word out to various weeklies and dailies, and so I put out press releases periodically and helped along that line. But you also had, we had to have electricians. That was
Dick Keane.
Dick Keane,
Yeah.
because we had to get the lights into the tents and the refreshment stand and stuff like that.
Yeah. The when we started out, just trying to figure out what the thing would cost, the Boston Arts Festival had gone out of business a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
And left an awful lot of debts.
Oh, I see.
So 2 of the 3 firms that I contacted about, giving us the price and so forth was the tent man who had been burned by the Boston Arts
Oh, is that
Festival.
right? Yeah.
And the other was a printing firm in South Boston who had also been burned by the thing.
Yeah.
But they went along with us, so it was encouraging.
And you got some seed money from some various people in town to get this thing off.
Well, yeah, and that's why I appreciated having old timers who grew up in the town and knew the people that we'd targeted, and they suggested rather than asking for money, we'd just ask these people to pledge money.
I see.
With the understanding that if our fundraising worked out the way we hoped, that there would probably be no need for them to do it.
Yeah.
To come through. So the 4 that we targeted and all bought that idea was John Walsh, Jim West, Ken Henrich.
Oh, I remember Ken. Yeah, sure. Home builder in town.
Yeah.
Oh, was that his brother Lawrence? Lawrence.
It might have been both Lawrence and Ken.
Yeah.
But Ken,
sure.
I know.
Yeah.
I did.
Ken owned the general store at the center of town, and it sold meats and vegetables and fruits, and eventually opened a side liquor store. And when the Center Pembroke Plaza took place, Ken was, well, Lawrence Henrich built it, did he not?
Yes, yeah.
And Ken became head of the liquor store, the initial liquor store across the street. And was he involved in the hardware there?
Yes, he had a hardware store also.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And so that was the end of kind of an era, because that general store, just about everyone in town at one time or another who were living there went to that general store. That its history went way back to the beginning of the 20th century.
Back in the days where you could charge things, pay once a month or once a week or whatever it was. Yeah. So the town has grown an awful lot in the last 50 years since we moved here, but it's in a lot of ways we've kind of lost that feeling.
That old time.
Which is maybe inevitable, I suppose.
Went with the horses and the carriages and.
No, not that bad.
Yeah. Oh, God. Well, did we do enough on that? One of the books, if you recall, it was mostly in its heyday before our lives, but on the Brockton to Plymouth trolley line passed by Pembroke and went through, I guess, Whitman and Hanson, Pembroke, then all the way to Plymouth. And the owners of that railway decided to create a grove of fun, swimming and theater and restaurants and movie houses and so forth.
Reasons for people to ride the trolley.
Yeah, that's right. And so, and they called it Mayflower Grove. And on July 4th, Independence Day, was the first trip through by the trolley to stop at this turnaround. Wasn't there a movie house as well?
I think there was.
They were probably
silent pictures.
Silent pictures at that time. Talkies didn't come in until about 1927, 28, something like that. But there were restaurants there and snack stands.
Oh,
yeah. And of course they had, it was on the pond, so they had rental canoes where people could go out.
I think you could probably rent a bathing suit as well.
Yeah.
The kind that itch like hell.
Yeah, those old woolies. Yeah. We did this an interview with John Walsh when Pembroke 2000 was first published. And John at that time was not only the town moderator, but do you recall he was also some sort of MC on
He had an interview program of some kind that ran, I think, on some kind of regular schedule. I never figured what the schedule was, but so he did corral us for that one.
Yeah, to get the book some publicity, as I recall.
Yeah. The reason I pushed to have the historical publish that and have you write it was we was getting ready to celebrate the millennium. Which I thought was going to be a big deal. Turned out it wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah, but in other words, the change of from the 20th to the 21st century. Yeah,
it's a good milestone to
sure.
things anyway.
So the book essentially was about the 20th century. From 1900 to 2000. Yeah. I remember one of the characters, and he's in the book. His name was Horatio Dobb. He was at that time, there was no full-time fire department in Pembroke, but he was the chief of the volunteer firefighters who would show up at a specific fire. And he's in the book, and he was worked in the restaurant there or something to that, as I recall. And he had been fire chief for what, 1,000 years?
Something like that.
Yeah. But a well-known person in town.
Yeah.
And it's Horatio Dobb here, and he was the fire chief in town for many years. But at that particular time, you know, he worked in the restaurant at Mayflower Grove, and at that particular time, there was no full-time fire department. There was volunteer firefighters who would hear the alarm and which went off at a certain beat, so they'd know what part of town there might be a fire. But Horatio Dobb became, I'm pretty sure, the first fire chief. In fact, I know he was. I think that's all I have to say about him. I'm sorry.
Our former town treasurer, Cyril Littlefield,
Good old Cy.
yeah, was part of the family that effectively closed down Mayflower Grove. And he and presumably his parents, I guess, ran it for a number of years. And the thing that really did them in was the hurricane of 1938.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
And then the hurricane of 1944.
44, yeah.
And
that ruined them.
And of course, World War II didn't help at all.
Yeah, of course. And of course, many pine trees which surrounded this amusement park, Mayflower Grove, was surrounded by tall pine trees.
Yes.
And probably over, as I recall, over 100 pine trees came down between that storm in 1938 and the hurricane of 44. I think that was the last straw, I think, for
probably
Mayflower Grove. Yeah. Because the trees came down upon these, the movie house and the restaurant and all the wonderful places that these folks in the early days went.
Well, yeah, it probably had run its course anyway, because, you know, not long after you had television and other sources of entertainment.
Sure.
And
yeah.
So that was kind of old-fashioned to most people.
Yeah, sure. And then I think they took out the trolley tracks, and so that trolley line no longer became buses after that.
Yeah.
One of the very likable person and well-accepted persons in town was Gregory Wright, the police chief. And he was the first police chief, as I recall, who was not initially a resident of Pembroke. Is that not true?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And the other first is he was the first, not only the first African-American on the police force, but he was always also the first African-American police chief. And he was from out of town, and it was a marvelous decision to appoint him because he's well qualified. He was from the police department in Newton. It was Newton, wasn't it?
Sounds right, yes. Yeah.
And but he was well received and well accepted, and he had a marvelous smile, a very pleasant man. And I thought that for a small town like Pembroke down here in the South Shore, to have done that, to have appointed him, it was quite unusual because it was a first. He was among the firsts of many things, you know, and just a good guy. Brooks, one story I did hear about Chief Wright was, wasn't there some woman in town who was in distress or something was going on, and she called the police department? How did that story go?
What I recall the story, and I never heard it firsthand from anybody, was that he was over in Bryanttville and around one of the ponds, and we're just checking out some complaint or something like that.
Yeah.
And a neighbor saw him and called the police and said there's a suspicious person, obviously unsaid but suspicious black person, who's poking around, and you know he should be investigated.
This is the police chief.
This is the police chief.
I heard a different story. A woman was in distress, something going, and he knocked on her door. Did you hear that story?
I didn't hear that version of it, no.
Yeah.
But it's probably all comes from the same
The same
basic incident.
Yeah, and she saw him and slammed the door in his face and called the police department and saying there was a suspicious man or something like that. Yeah, that's one of those Pembroke yarns that has gone around, have gone around.
I think the best police chief story, though, centers around Alfred Lancelotta when the policeman's ball used to be quite the
at the center school, didn't they?
At the center school,
yeah, the auditorium
they had
there,
all kinds of magic acts and acrobats and all kinds of things. And inside, because it was a school and close to a church, there was absolutely no alcohol.
Yes.
Outside, in the parking lot, there was a good deal of alcohol consumed by one and all.
Yeah.
But anyway, somebody got the idea one year when Alfred was police chief that it would be fun to steal his car.
To steal the chief's cruiser, yeah.
So they stole the cruiser and put it safely into his own garage.
His own garage, yeah.
And he didn't find out until the next day. And he was very angry about that.
Yeah. He and his wife was Josephine, was it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and they neither one of them went into the garage and so it was a day or two, maybe the next day, he found the car. But I know who was the instigator of that. Can I say that?
I think you can.
It was George Shaw, who at that particular time was a patrolman, or perhaps a sergeant. George eventually became police chief in town. George was a great practical joker. He played a marvelous practical joke on Ralph Rankin, who became a selectman. But Ralph was the member down at Hosey Benson's place, Hosey's, and they call themselves the Pembroke Birdwatchers Society.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
I do recall it, yeah.
Yeah. And none of these fellows knew bees about birds, but it was just Ralph had a column in the Silver Lake News, and he would write up about the Pembroke Birdwatchers Society, and telling about they saw this bird, that bird, and I guess several bird lovers were looking on their bird feeders for these exotic birds that never existed. And but the funny story about George Shaw is when Ralph Rankin he was an architect in town as well as on the Board of Health and also selectman. But when he went on a vacation trip to Hawaii, Honolulu, George Shaw and a newspaper friend of his cooked up the scheme in which we found out the name of the Audubon Society in Honolulu. I think his name was William Ord, and we sent him a telegram. Dear Ord, famous ornithologist, was that what a bird lover is?
Please welcome famed U.S. ornithologist,
Ralph Lee
Rankin, arriving Honolulu.
And the telegram gave the flight number and the arrival time and everything else. Well, Rankin couldn't get rid of this fellow for a whole week. he thought Ralph was this lovely bird lover and so famous ornithologist. Oh my God, what a practical joke that was. This is George Shaw, great practical joker, you know. The same fellow who instigated his police chief's car and put it in. He did that with, was that fellow Rich, was it, who owned the Sunoco station at the center?
Don Rich?
Donald Rich.
Yeah.
Donald Rich got a tow car, one of those tow things, and hauled away the car, and they put it in Al Lancelotta's garage. That's a great story. And that's typical George Shaw. He's just a practical joker, would do anything. I think that's the end of that story. Lillian Dunn was one of the original one-room schoolhouse teachers who became a principal um, at the Center High School, was it? Or the Center Elementary School?
Center School.
The Center School, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lovely woman. And you probably knew more about her than I did, but...
By reputation only, because it came up when we tried to find a place to hold the arts festival.
Yeah.
She had scared all of the kids who went to Center School that they should stay off her lawn. Because she wanted the grass to grow nice and all the rest. So consequently, some of the locals who were helping us organize that first festival, they still recalled Miss Dunn and her admonitions about her lawn and all the rest of it, and they were really apprehensive about asking her.
Yes.
But then we were able to get one of the assistant superintendent of the school system on our board of directors, and he was able to smooth that request and get it right through.
He was Mr. Mahoney, was he?
Maloney.
Maloney. Geez,
yeah.
A mind is a terrible thing to lose. And I heard that she was a very strict teacher, but fair, but disciplined. Discipline was kind of important in those days.
But it's my understanding that she was quite enthusiastic about the idea of an arts festival.
Oh, she was. Yeah. She was a very bright woman and cheerful. Right up until the day that she retired, and I think she's mentioned in that history book that the Historical Society sponsored. In the middle of this picture is Lillian Dunn upon the occasion of her retirement after many, many years in the Pembroke school system. And she's surrounded by various municipal town officials and giving her a wonderful party in her retirement. Hosey Benson was a well-beloved character in town, as you recall, Brooks. And every serviceman who went into the World War II was given a wonderful send-off by Hosey and treated very kindly. But Hosey Benson originally owned the Brown Betty, which was a dancing hall and restaurant on the corner of Wampatuck Street.
Wampatuck and Mattakesett, yeah.
Yes, that's right. And so essentially, when he, around the 1930s, I think it was, he opened his own restaurant across the street, in which he named Hosey's. I can remember a big Pickwick Ale sign outside.
Yes.
But initially he did not have a liquor license, but eventually when he did, it became a tavern, and I'm not sure women were invited, but initially, but eventually it was more known not for its restaurant, but for the wonderful bar that he had and local characters going in there, and that was where the famous Pembroke bird watchers gathered. These are fellows who couldn't fly on one wing, as I recall. And what do you know about Hosey?
Well, I think you pretty well summarized how it started. I recall the first time that I went to Hosey's was maybe a year or so after we'd moved to town.
Yep.
And I came in after work, and I was wearing a three-piece suit with a very conservative charcoal gray, and I had a military-type haircut at that time.
Yeah.
And the customers in there took one look at me and figured that I must be FBI. And there was a silence that went right across the whole room.
Brooks, I don't know whether you heard this story, but Hosey not only was a delightful guy with veterans going away to the war, but also every July 4th. I don't know whether you heard the story or not, but he would put a large mound of sawdust outside his restaurant on Mattakesa Street and put in the sawdust coins.
Oh.
Nickels, dimes, quarters, $50, and of course, he would then, all the kids would circle around this mound of sawdust and he'd say, go, and they would dive into the sawdust to get the coins. And that's the kind of a guy he was. He did like kids very much so, yeah. The wonderful Pembroke Golf Club, in its first few years, it was just a 9-holer, but then they built it into an 18-holer. It was built by Joe and Frank Lanzalotta.
Yes.
How'd that work out?
Seemed to work out fine, and I'm surprised at the number of kids who started out as junior members of that, who've gone on to careers.
Yeah, that's right.
As golf pros.
Yeah, and we, you and I, we thought we'd support this whole project because we were involved in town government, and so we joined in the first couple of years, and as I recall, your two sons.
Yeah, two of my sons were members and are now both PGA pros.
They became golf professionals, yeah.
Yeah, Ken Johnson's two of his sons also became golf pros after, and there are some others I'm not sure, younger than that who have pursued careers in the golf industry as well.
And your two sons were Brian and Glenn, and they were the sons of you and Ann.
Yeah.
And as I recall, the longer I played that game, the worse I got. And I could fling a club farther than I could hit a ball. And so I bought a boat. So on a sunny day, I'd be out on the boat, you know. But I just couldn't concentrate on hitting that little ball. How about you? I remember you were a terrible player.
I was terrible. You know, I gave it 10 years, and you know, I regret wasting 10 years of my life.
Yeah. But it turned out to be a lovely, well-known golf course in Massachusetts. It's a lovely course.
Very challenging,
Yeah. Wow. And the wonderful Lanzalotta brothers did that. And Joe Lanzalotta, who was married to Rose, if you recall, just passed away this very year. And great guy. Frank was a great guy too, but he died younger. Let me see. Joe lived on Dwelly Street, and Frank lived on West Elm?
West Elm, yes.
Yeah. And they owned that golf course for a number of years till eventually they get a little bit older and they decided to get out of that business, and they were house builders and contractors before that.
I don't think either one of them played golf ever in their life.
I don't think
they weren't even tempted. So.
But in any case, let's see, the Lanzalottas and the Trotters, lovely Italian-American families. The way I get it, Brooks, is Helen Lanzalotta, Joe and Frank's sister, married Anthony Trotter, and they had numerous kids, if you recall. And they all lived on Dwelly Street, didn't they?
I think probably,
yeah. Yeah. And then I remember Tony, who would be Anthony Jr., married Nan or Helen DeSaulniers from South Boston, and they had 3 or 4 kids. I can't remember, but marvelous, hardworking families, were they not?
Oh yes, yeah.
And as we already said, they created the Pembroke Country Club, but they also were house builders and contractors. They would do anything, road work in Pembroke, and very famous names. The Lanzalottas and the Trotters go back a century or more, and Wonderful people.
Yeah.
Brooks, I remember Betty Trotter, who also lived on Dwelly Street, and with her husband, Paul. And she was quite active in town. She was a chairwoman of the Democratic Town Committee, and also, and wonderfully, she was one of the first members of the Housing Authority, was she not?
I think perhaps she was, yeah.
Yeah.
I just remember her being very active in the Democratic Committee.
Yeah.
Since I swing from the other side of the plate.
Yes, but we all remained friends.
Yeah.
And, Betty was a very attractive woman and very friendly and kind and a good friend of my wife, Dolores. They were very good friends.
Well, it's been very pleasant. Hope you who are watching it have enjoyed the whole thing, and we look forward to doing this kind of thing again. This is the 300th anniversary of the town. It's I've only been in town for 50 years, so I'm a rookie at this whole thing, but it's been very good so far, and hopefully we'll hang around for a few more years.
Let's hope so, Brooks. I too want to thank you for watching this bit of nonsense between Brooks and myself, and I want to thank you, Dr. Jones, for filming us. Yes, the town is going through this 300th anniversary, and we hope you'll come out to the various functions. The town is going to have big fireworks on July 4th, a big parade in the fall, and it's also producing a book called The 300th Anniversary of Pembroke, and that should be out shortly. And but once again, thank you kindly for watching us.